This morning I walked up the stairs of Maxwell to look upon President Lincoln sitting there in front of Maxwell, pondering the concerns and challenges that faced him and this country. Maxwell has stood for over 90 years, preparing leaders to solve those challenges that face our communities, our nation, and the world. The panelists that have come together today are courageous, competent, and successful. And I say courageous because it is someone who takes the time to stay working with an organization, striving every day to make that organization better, to serve the people that it is manifest to serve, and it takes courage when people are saying no or you can't do that. These women have stood the test of time, and they have not only worked, they have succeeded, they have helped, they have made an imprint on people's lives. These women engender the most important stanza of the Oath of the Athenian city-state, but greater, better, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. They continue to work and they continue to do and make our lives so much better by what they do. Dr. Margo Bailey and I met in this room 27 years ago. Understand, I was a lot older. She's only 30. Margo was a founding board member and former board chair of the Elsie, Whitlow, Stokes public charter schools in Washington, D.C. She has been my friend, and she is a woman that I have come to respect, a woman that I hope my daughter can be as great as her. She provides coaching and training to nonprofit organizations in the areas of strategic planning, process improvement, program evaluation, and measurement systems, board governance, and corporate wellness. Her clients include the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, the Elsie, Whitlow, Stokes Public Charter School, United Way of the National Capital Area. The list is long and distinguished, but what it doesn't tell you is she is committed to service, something that Maxwell prepares us, teaches us, trains us to do, to serve. Now, I'm not going to embarrass Ms. Lumpkin and say how long I've known her, but it's been more than a day. 2 days. She is another outstanding and great person, and she was I have to say, in all fairness, she was my second choice to be on this panel discussion, because Tamara is, once again, courageous. I will tell you that I have been in war, I have seen bullets come by, but what she has done over her career in Washington, D.C. is more courageous than anything that I could have done, because teaching children is a thankless job, and she did it well. She was the Deputy Executive Director for the D.C. Public Charter School Board. She was a leading force in the development of the Performance Management Framework, which provides rankings of the charter campuses on a 100-point scale and organizes them into 3 performance tiers. Ms. Lumpkin also developed the board's process of closing underperforming, financially struggling schools as new ones opened. During her tenure, the city's charter portfolio grew from 8 schools to 53, and now enrolls nearly 50% of public school students. These two women, now I'm gonna give a little plug because it is important to say. They are great women, they are courageous women, and they also happen to be members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Being a member of Delta Sigma Theta doesn't make them great. They surround themselves with great women. Fanny Villarreal. I met her, I think now maybe a year. See, I can say that, and that's all right. About a year ago, and I was immediately intrigued, and I did a little check about her to see who she was and what she has done. And let me say this, she has been an advocate for the Latino community in Central New York since her arrival. She is currently the executive director of the YWCA of Syracuse and Onondaga County. She has served the Central New York community in various not-for-profit roles, including Family and Community Development Director at Peace and Executive Director at the Spanish Action League, a native of Peru. She is the founder of Nosotros Radio Incorporated, Your Latino Voice, and co-founder of the New York State Hispanic Coalition. Before I close, I want to thank my good friend, Norma Shannon, who has worked tirelessly to bring this together. And I also want to thank Tom Fazio and the career development team of Lauren Meyer and Kelly Young, because Maxwell is a great place to have a degree from. I will tell you that Margo and Tamara and I were part of the Maxwell Mafia in Washington, D.C. And if you don't know what the Maxwell Mafia is, please stay after, talk to them, learn what it is to be part of the Maxwell Mafia. It is a great association, and this is a great school, and these are great women. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel, for that wonderful and very gracious introduction. You made us blush on more than one occasion, but you have a way of doing that. I'll open up a bit. I really appreciate being able to come back to Maxwell, only for Miguel. I'm from Virginia originally, so coming to Syracuse was quite a shock for me in terms of the cold weather. And we were reminded of that this morning when we stepped out and it was 39 degrees. But it's good to be back and good to see all of you all and good to see the expansion of the building. So I can't wait till after this to be able to go and look around. But in putting together this panel, you know, nonprofits and public charter schools, sometimes people are like, what's the fit there? So I'll just open up a bit just to give people a little bit of an understanding about charter schools, because a lot of people hear that word and then they'll equate it with vouchers or private schools, and none of that is correct. So I want to make sure we're all starting from the same place. Charter schools are public schools, publicly funded, that run independent of traditional school systems. In exchange for autonomy, being able to essentially do whatever you'd like to do. That's the pure sense of it. It's not like that in every state. But in order to be able to have the autonomy and freedom to educate kids as they would like and educate them successfully is the goal. They are accountable for achieving specific results. In essence, if you don't achieve these results, you can't remain in business anymore. You know, the challenge is that some states don't give as much autonomy. The other challenge is that some authorizers don't take seriously holding schools accountable and then closing them when they need to. I was fortunate enough, I was telling the dean, when I first, and it's like this with other people who go into charter authorizing. As an authorizer, we were the ones who, a group of community folks would come to us and submit an application to establish a charter school. It would go through a rigorous review, and those that were good, we would approve, and hopefully they would succeed, and if not, we dealt with that later. And those who weren't, we give them their feedback, and maybe they'll come back, maybe they won't. And then once the schools were open, we provide the oversight, do the check-ins, and provide high-stakes reviews to see if they should stay in business. And we have some interventions in between. I was fortunate enough, and people say, well, how did you land in that? Literally, this dates me, as if, the 2 days that I knew Miguel didn't date me. But it was in a newspaper ad in the Washington Post. And there were actually 2 chartering authorities. I ended up with the good one, the DC Public Charter School Board, an independent board. And the linkage to nonprofits is that the charter schools are established as nonprofits. So I hadn't had, I had a basic understanding, of course, coming from Maxwell, but this was my first real entree into governance. And I worked for a board, so I kind of saw it on both ends. So my stories will be about the interesting experiences I had with different boards and what you can learn, and it's very much applicable. We drove 6 hours yesterday, so we got to share our story some more and to see the linkages, whether it's a charter school or not, but that's the vantage point that I will have. What we will have here is very much a conversation about our different experiences. We're going to start off with Margo, and I'll just take it from there. And you all do have postcards, so as you develop questions, feel free to write those down. And Norma will play, Oprah for us and hand the mic.
So we want to spend, of course we'll chat with you, but towards the end as well, we want you to be able to share with us as well. So we may move a little quickly through our stories, but it's just so that we can have more time later to talk more in detail of the stories and answer any specific questions that you have. And so to kind of frame this, we've come up with about 6 lessons we think are important to share. You're not going to see them all right now. As we move through the stories, we'll share them with you. But you'll see the overlap. Hopefully you'll see how they relate or are not the same as what you might be learning in class. Sometimes there's a disconnect between what we're taught in class and the reality of it when we actually go and try to apply what everyone said is the right thing to do. So I've been a board chair several times over now. And I've been a board chair from, as Miguel mentioned, as a founding board chair. I've stepped in as a board chair to organizations that have been established for a long time. And I've also stepped into a board chair role for a very small organization as well. So some of my stories are around that role, and some of my other stories are in my roles as from working as a nonprofit, but also in working in a nonprofit, but also as a consultant. So my first story is around executive transition in a nonprofit. This nonprofit organization had been around for about, at the time, 40 years in the community in Washington, D.C. And when they asked me to be on the board, of course you're like, yeah, I'll be on the board. How hard can it be? Yeah, right. They asked me to come on because I had experience as evaluation, and we want you to do the evaluation. Well, the next, a couple years later, I'm the board chair. And so one of the things that happens when you become the board chair is that you begin to get an insight into how well the executive director is or is not doing. And so in this particular instance, what I realized, as well as the rest of my executive committee, is that our executive director perhaps needed to transition out of the organization. And it was a combination of, we were at the same time developing a new strategic plan. So we're establishing, it was our first strategic plan. Didn't I say we were in existence for 40 years? So we were doing our first strategic plan, and in doing that, as well as having the regular conversations and meetings with the executive director, we realized, as we're charting this new future, that she may not be the right person to step into this role. So short story is she recognized that as well, because the questions were getting tougher, the answers were not coming as they needed to come. So she recognized that it was time for her to move on. And so I didn't have to have that difficult conversation of you need to move on. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that. But what it set up was we now had to look for a new executive director. And so we did all that, and we found a phenomenal executive director, bring her on board, and she calls me and she says, "Where's this document?" She said, "Where's this? Where's that? Did you know this?" I'm like, "No." I didn't know that. Now, mind you, we were a good executive committee. We weren't an executive committee that wasn't aware. We knew about finance, and we thought we did a great job. And we have a brand new executive director coming to tell us we had some challenges with the current lease on one of our facilities. We had no idea. No idea. And one of the other questions that we didn't clarify is when the old executive director would leave. So the new executive director calls me to say, "When's she leaving?" Because she was still coming into the office. So one of the lessons to take away from this is as you do executive transitions, and this is not only just for executive director transitions, but also for key leadership positions in your organization, is ask the right questions, right? And so reflecting back, I could probably think of 20 questions to ask, but each situation is unique. Some of the basic ones are, do you have all of your organizational documents together in one place? Not just on the flash drive, but are they available in the notebook? If you do have a leasing agreement, do we have a copy of the lease? Are we clear about what those leasing arrangements are? And that becomes part of conversations around expansion, so on and so forth. So not to take up much more time of this, because I know I think Fanny is going to add to this as well. Asking the right questions, and they're developed by your board, and also the other members of the organizational leadership team, is to make sure you get the right set of information from your old executive director before you just hand off stuff to your new executive director. And your new executive director actually might have some questions that you didn't think about that you need to feed into that as well.
I think in my case, my experience was very much similar to what Tamara is talking about. When I started working in my organization, and it is funny because this happened in a small scale in my previous organization, so kind of I have an idea when I land into this beautiful job that my board of directors told me. This is what it is. You have this wonderful organization and all this beautiful information. And I was like, yes. So I'm ready to grow it, right? Because that was my plan. So I have a plan. But once I land into my organization, I start discovering different things. So I'm like, wait a minute. And so then the right question was, so I really never asked then what the previous executive director's role or what she was working on it. So then I said to the board of directors, this is what we need to do now, a succession plan, starting now. Even I just started a day today. We have to figure out how to do that because I don't want anybody to come after me and go through what I'm going through. And so it was very lining for me to learn a lot of different things again. I think one of the things that we need to take care of as soon as we get into this position as executive director is going through the finances. Look for the audits, look for the management letters. Pay attention to that because that's your base. And then for me, it was kind of hard because the previous executive director was there forever and ever and ever and ever. And so the staff that was there was forever and ever and ever and ever too. So when I came here brand new, of course, were like, when I ask a question, well, I don't know. And I'm like, okay. Then I ask another question. I don't know. I go, okay. I ask another question. I don't know. And I'm like asking, so if somebody knows about something, what's going on here? Or do I have to learn everything from scratch? Because I could do that. I went to Maxwell School, so I could do that. But I just want to know if you can help me out to understand the state of the organization. So ask the right question is very, very important. And so that was my story. You know, when you got into, if you are looking into get into a not-for-profit, and if you want to go into the management, being an executive director or maybe director of programming, it's go into the finances first. So then you can, your base is there. And then from there, of course, you move into programs, you move into staff, you know, you have to build the trust from the staff. So that's from my perspective from the executive directors, asking the right questions.
And I know Margo had another learning from her example that is related to something that I saw.
So one of the learnings that came out of that particular experience, and I saw it in other places as well, is I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with the notion of the Peter principle, right? That you rise, you get promoted into positions that you may not be able to fill or do well. So I shared that we realized that our current, the executive director may not have the skill set to move forward, but similar to what you shared, she had been with the organization for a long time, right? She had started out in a key role, and then there was transition, and then boom, she was the executive director. And so there were weaknesses early on, but because of, things were kind of okay. But when you start moving forward, the question as to whether or not she was the right person to do what needed to be next was an important decision to make. And then I've been in other places where you're thinking about, okay, is this a person, she's not quite there yet, maybe we can help her grow into the position. That's an important question because we all reach a point where you're offered an opportunity where you go, I'm not quite sure if I've got the skills to do this, but maybe I can be okay. But keep the Peter principle in mind. Right?
And that happened to me too, because once I got into this position, then, I did have to strengthen the management component of the organization, so there was somebody that have this high position, but I couldn't afford it, so I needed to send that person to a program. And so I made her the director of a program, and we talked about it, and she agreed with it. But again, she was not equipped with that because she was the boss of everybody, and now she became the boss of only this group. Mm-hmm. So it was a debate between me and her who was the boss of everybody. So I will say yes, she will say no. I will say no, she will say yes. So I talk, and I talk, and I talk, and then she was making miserable the whole program. And I didn't realize that. So it's very important that we look into this Peter principle, because I thought I was doing a favor, but actually I wasn't. So then I look at it again, and I said, you know what, I'm sorry, but we cannot do this anymore. I'm making miserable yourself, I'm making miserable myself, and I'm making miserable everybody, so a decision has to be done. And so, thanks God, she found another job, so she left the organization. So now you can see everybody like, and I was like, oh my God, how I didn't see the Peter principle. But that's what happened. Right. So it is very important that, sometimes we believe that, we are helping and we're doing the right decision when we move people here and there. But if we don't look into if the person have the qualification, is the person going to be able to do it? If the person that was here is going to be okay going here? So.
Right, and I saw a similar situation with a charter school. This is one of the first charter schools that opened in D.C., and in this one case, the school opened up small, only 9th grade. It was a high school and was going to add a grade a year. The leader of the school, very passionate, got a lot of buy-in from the community, from foundations in terms of money, because she was just very charismatic. You talk about that visionary leader, she was it. So much so, had so much passion for educating the kids that of her 9th grade class, her first class, I would say roughly 50% of them she had retained into the 9th grade, because she was like, you can't go forward. You know, we're not going to be able to graduate you and have you go to all these wonderful colleges like Syracuse, because you didn't come with the skills. And that really got everybody's attention about, you know, what a charter school can do. So here's this woman with this great vision. She makes it through her first 4 years. We would review charters every 5 years and had some success. You know, it was kind of rocky, up and down, but progressively getting better. So she ends her 5 years. We've evaluated, okay, you can go for another 5 years. And then that summer, she comes to us saying, I want to add a campus. Now, mind you, her vision was not just of educating kids, but educating a specific population within DC and a specific neighborhood. The one thing I will say that I didn't put out there before is the challenge in almost every place that I talked to, that I visited with, as it relates to charter schools, is facilities. So she had moved from one floor of an office building that was being converted to literally a building that had formerly been like this big laundromat service. So, you know, you've got kids in nooks and crannies and everywhere. When they changed classes, you were overwhelmed with all the kids all over the place. So they really needed a facility. So she decides we have to have a new facility, which means we need more kids. Plus, I want to add a junior high. Okay, great. We were kind of skittish about it, but, you know, she had this great plan and all these resources. One of the critical elements, though, was who was going to run the high school, because this principal was going to become the executive director. Here's where the Peter principal came in. She took someone who I always liked personally, because she was a fellow MPA, who had been with the school, helped them with performance management and data, and the executive director now decides, we will make her the principal of the high school. Exactly. So the look on her face, because that's like saying, make me the principal of the high school. You know, I understand education, but I can't run a school. So I said, okay, you know, and that's the thing with charter schools. Flexibility, autonomy, you know, if you can do it, but that's the question, if you can do it. Just because you can make someone a principal doesn't mean they should be a principal. Unfortunately, that's what she found out. And we questioned, there were organizations in the city that help train people. You know, it exists for the traditional schools as well. New leaders for new schools and all. Hey, you know, we can take her in the summer and give her some things to help make her ready. And the executive director was like, I don't have time for that, because I need her to do X, Y, Z and these things so that we can open up this new building. And unfortunately, so the one story with the Peter principal was, she found out, unfortunately, within that year that this wasn't the right person for the job. In a sense, she wanted to reward her for her loyalty and for being around, but it was to a detriment to the overall growth of the school, which then also leads to the next lesson. Did it pop up? Because I can't turn around.
Don't chase the money.
Don't chase the money, or in this case, the building. A big adage with nonprofits is, you know, you should have your mission and everything should be about your mission. But a lot of times people say, well, you know, I have money for this, off mission. And you follow, you know, you can have more for your bottom line, but then you're not serving the right population, you're off mission. In her case, it was chasing the building. I said she wanted to serve a specific population in a specific community. The building that she was promised, that was dangled in front of her, was in a whole other community. And the community that she wanted to serve, it was understood, they don't travel across town. They stay at schools within this specific area. But she has the idea that she's going to move across town, she's going to add middle school, have this principal who's not prepared to be a principal. You know, need I say more? You're not, the result was she lost some of the students that she originally served. School culture goes down. Performance goes down. And you have the principal who's not able to lead teachers. So that also, I think, if I have it there, we've all heard this, fail to plan, plan to fail. I don't know that this was an organization that had a strategic plan, You know, it was very about the building. And we know we want to grow, but at what cost? So that was a big challenge with her. And then it leads to, I know a story that Margo has, about the...
Yeah. So actually I'm going to cover the last three of them, because they all come together. In that when we talk about, you know, we hear this often in nonprofit organizations, you know, don't chase the money. And it's very easy to go off mission. Oh, the kids, you know, so you have a reading program, but they don't have coats. So now let's do coats. Let's give them coats and meals and all this stuff. Not a bad way, but is it the right thing for your organization to do? And so when you have your strategic plan, it allows you to make those choices, right? A strategic planning process is about making choices, establishing your priorities to say not only what you will do, but what you won't do. That's a critical piece of the strategic planning process. And so I'll share two quick stories here. Remember, I talked about the organization that was doing a strategic plan for the first time. And when we looked at the final set of goals, I think we all knew right away that one of them wasn't going to happen, because it was a goal that was really outside of our primary work. It was, you know, it was an advocacy mission, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be trouble because we don't do advocacy. We have advocacy organizations that are dedicated 100% to advocacy. You know, do we have the capacity? Do we have the resources to make it happen? And when we did the next strategic plan, that dropped off the goal set, right? Because we didn't do anything for it for 4 years and got refocused. But part of this planning piece and identifying your strategies is being clear about, do you have the right people to help you execute your strategies? And so one of the lessons that I've learned, particularly in terms of board recruitment, is you have to be very targeted in your board recruitment. I understand there are times when you say, Tamara's my girl, I'll know she'll serve on the board for a little bit, okay? She'll serve for a little, but what does she bring? So in one of my board experiences, you know, we needed a new building. We needed a new facility. We needed to create a permanent place to call school, right? You always think about a school having its own building. And so what we did, and as we transitioned to the board to a board that will get us this building, right? So we brought in people from the development community. We brought in folks who could, when I say people, meant one person, right? You can't have the whole board filled with these. But we brought on individuals who had the expertise in real estate, building development, financing. Okay, because that's what it takes to get a building. I don't care where you are, whether it's DC, Central New York, Iowa. You need that kind of experience to get a land that meets your needs, to put together the financing, the legal expertise to negotiate those very complicated processes. And so for that 4 or 5 year span, that's where the board recruitment was. It was also very focused on, we need money too. So we brought on board members who were asked to raise money. Not that they were neglectful of their other board responsibilities, because you just don't come onto a board to do one thing. You have your whole, your whole plate there. But they knew exactly what their purpose was. We came to them with the ask, we need you to do this. Can you do this? Yes, and they only have to do it for 1 term, right? We're not asking you to serve the whole full, 12 years or whatever the number is for 3 successive terms. Can you help us for the next 3, 4, 5 years? Wonderful, all done. We're on to the next thing. And so once the building was completed, we transitioned the board to now focus more on the educational piece. Not to say that the education piece wasn't neglected, but there was a shift to, now that we have the permanent building, we can now focus more around the dynamics of developing the appropriate culture, all of the student development pieces that go along with that. So the targeted board focus became around the special education and other things that the school needed to address. So as you think about betting on the people, Strategies are great, right? They all look wonderful on paper, but you have to think about who is going to execute it. Who is going to be responsible? Who is that group? What is that group of people who are going to ensure that that strategy is executed the way that it's intended to be? So you really have to be clear. This relates to the Peter Principle somewhat. But particularly when you're looking at your board members, don't be afraid to say, this is what I need you to do. Can you do it? And they'll say, no, I can't, but Fanny can. Let me call Fanny. She'll do it. So that will open up a network of other people who might be available to you that may have never showed up on your radar. So
talking about that, my experience is another, and so strategic planning, we mentioned strategic planning, something to move forward the organization. So I get into the agency and I ask for the strategic planning. They do have a strategic plan. I say, oh yes, great. So they gave me the strategic planning, and it was for 2011 to 2013. So I came in 2013. And I said, oh, so now we need to look into the next year's, right? Yes. But then I start looking the other strategic plannings, the previous ones, for the last 20 years, it was the same one. So I'm like, they just changed it. So they were just changing the years, every 2 years, same. And I'm like, what do I do now? And it was funny. Now it's funny, I'm laughing about it, but back then I was crying. Ah! And so then I said, you know what? There is wonderful community foundations here, so I'm gonna go and knock the door of one of them. And I did, and I got the monies, and then I talked to them and I explained it, They are supporting us now. So we just started the strategic planning like 2 months ago. So we're going through the whole process because it's very important for us to know where we're going. Now I know where I was. Now we are here. Now we need to know where we're going. In terms of the board of directors and the not-for-profit, you need to have every kind of single skills because ours is social services. But in our organization, we have all kinds of engineers. So I was like, okay, so we have wonderful engineers, but who is taking care of the finance? Do we have a CPA? No. How about litigation? Do we have a lawyer? No. I'm like, oh. So the board, some of the boards were brand new. They never, ever served in any board. So I said, well, there is 2 different groups here. With these brand new boards, either we train them because it will be great to train them and then we move forward, or what are we going to do? Because there is 2 or 3 that they have a lot of knowledge on board, but they saw that it didn't. But this one, when they saw all the change and decided to move on and leave. So then that gave us the opportunity to go and create a matrix. So we can plan and see what is it that we need. We need a lawyer, we need a CPA, we need somebody on fundraising, we need somebody that can help us with research, all this list. So little by little, we start filling those positions with people that will be able to help us out. Now, remember, the board is the governance. The not-for-profit is like a table, right? It's like a table. This table, you see the 4 legs? So here is the governance, which is the board. Here is the management, which will be the executive director. There is like the finances. And here is like the administration component. And then all these beautiful things, the water, all of this, it is the programs. So if one of those legs don't work, then what happened with the table? Goes to this, right. So that's what happened. So I was repairing one leg, and then the other one was going like this. And so I'm like, oh, my goodness. But, you know, it was great for me because it's a great experience, you know, that I'm learning. You know, every day is a learning experience for me working right now. In terms of the board, it is with your chair. You know, you have to be very tight with the chair of the board because you need to make decisions with her or him. You need to talk about how you feel. You know, I feel horrible in the very beginning. That's what I was saying. I've been there for 1 year and 9 months. I just have my baby. My baby's a year. I'm pretending. I'm talking about the not-for-profit. I didn't have a baby. My youngest, no, because she's like, yay! My youngest son is 8 years old. My oldest is 14. I have 2 boys. But talking about the not-for-profit is like I was pregnant for 9 months. So I deliver the not-for-profit. So the year is trying to work now. So we are working together with a board president, because the board president is the one that we're leading the organization. She's going to be the one that is helping me out to go through all of this, because you need to have that support. You might have a great ideas and awesome opportunities, but if the board doesn't support you, forget about it. So that's why I have to be a great communication, open communication with the board. Trust, trust, trust with the board and with your staff. You have to tell them. You have to talk to them and be open and say, you know, this is what happened. This is the state of the organization. This is what I'm thinking. We're move forward. What do you think? Let's work together. Let's do it together. We need to do it, because otherwise, you know, you can work by yourself, killing yourself, doing everything. But if your staff and if your board is not going to help you, then you must just sit in here and just wait for see what happened.
So we're sitting here nodding. Yeah, I think, why don't we?
Well,
yeah, we're gonna show one lesson, but we're gonna skip it to come to this notion of.
I will say the notion of blurred lines. So blurred lines is not just a Marvin Gaye song turned into a Robin Thicke song. It also applies as it relates to governance and management, and what Fanny was saying as it relates to the board chair and the executive director really having to work together. And I know Margo has.
Yeah, so I've been a board chair, right, 3 times. Yeah, I'll be a board chair, right? Becoming a board chair is like, at a minimum, it's another part-time job, at a minimum, okay? Sometimes it feels like another full-time job. You know, you are stepping into a role that requires at least monthly meetings with the executive director, if not twice monthly meetings with the executive director. You are meeting with your executive committee. You still have your board meeting. You may still be on another committee, right? That's 5 meetings I just said, right? In addition to your other job, right? And your family. And so that's just the time commitment. It is, so what if you did, I was a board chair at 2 organizations at the same time. So, yes, I'll do it. Yeah, you know, yeah, it's a wonderful learning opportunity, yes, yes. But it's an incredible amount of time. And oftentimes people become board chairs because no one else wants to do it. Why do you think no one else wants to do it, right? Because, you know, as a board member, right, you have a legal responsibility to your nonprofit organization. And then when you step into the board chair role, you are leading that governance activity. And there are times when you have to step into that role where, I'm sure all of you know, the board is responsible for the performance of the executive director, right? There should be annual performance reviews of the executive director. It's wonderful when you can give great feedback. It's tougher when you have to give feedback that's not so glowing back to the executive director. There will be times when you are a board chair when you have to represent the executive director, right? You go to the community events, or you may have to go to a hearing, or other types of activities. So I'm just speaking on the time commitment piece of it. And then there's this notion of blurred lines. Who makes the decision for what types of situations? So I can guess that there are times when Fanny said, that's my decision. Why is the board making that decision for me? And the board goes, well, that's our decision. It's not yours, Fanny, maybe, right? So really being clear about what are those areas in which the board needs to clarify for the executive director, these are the things that you have ownership of. These are the things that we have ownership of. There's always a gray area, right? You acknowledge the gray area so that when it comes up, you can step into those conversations comfortably. Ideally, so when you look at the nonprofit cycle, there are times when the board is very hands-on, right? Startup organizations, you're painting the rooms, you're out doing recruiting, that kind of stuff. But eventually, over time, you want your board to move into the governance and the oversight oversight roles and responsibility, and it's fundraising responsibilities. And I say that because every board member has some type of fundraising responsibility. And, but it gets, you know, these blurred lines. It's very difficult, like, you know, very difficult to have these conversations.
It is very difficult. And I went to a training last week. You know, I love to learn and learn. And I have that aha moment talking about that, because now it was put it in my face how the board and the executive director will work. Governance, executive director. So in governments, meaning the board of directors, they take care of everything that have to do with the organization in order to finances, meaning that even though the executive director will create the budget, the ones who will manage and approve it is the board. But for example, if any of the board members wants to volunteer doing something in the organization, then it will be the executive director's decision whether yes or no, because that's as an individual. The board of directors is as a whole. So whatever is 10 or 12 people in your board, as a group, they made the decisions about your organization. But as individual coming to this role and helping with the school, helping with the dance, the after-school program, or helping painting, or helping all of that, it's the executive director's role. That's the fine line. That's the fine line. It's the executive director's role to supervise that particular project or to say yeah or no. And so I was like excited because I'm going to share that with my board chair. So maybe we can do a little training about that. And it's pretty plain and simple how they did it. And I'm like, wow, this is awesome. Because I've been in the situation that I was like, wait a minute, I was supposed to make a decision? Why did they make it? Maybe, should I say something about it? Maybe not. Maybe I just listen. Maybe I'm going to learn something. Maybe they're thinking something else. Maybe, right? So I don't say anything. And then I ask. And they said, oh, we thought that was ours. I said, well, I thought it was ours. Oh, we'll talk about it. And then we talk about it. We discuss about it. We clear. And then we move forward. But it is pretty easy to jump from one line to the other when you don't really have that specific line. It's like when you are a friend. You have a friend that is working with you. You go outside, you go to the movies, drink, whatever you want to do with your friend, but that friend works for you too. That's a very fine line that you need to make sure that your friend knows that from that door here, when we're working, it's everything, you know, by the rules. From that door outside, you do whatever you want, but you cannot have crossing those rules because then it will be a chaos.
Well, and the sad thing is, I have an example where the line was crossed. A huge leap. It wasn't crossed. He jumped over the line. But it was necessary in this case, and we had to keep a good eye on it to make sure it didn't take the school completely off the track. We had a school that was, in a sense, sponsored by a major industry in the area, and so much so that the name of a company in this industry was attached to the school. They had, and they had, like what you had all the engineers. Their board was filled with people from the industry who didn't know education. And that was the thing we're telling them, you need to get some academic folks on your board. And so they'd had a series of principals, and they finally get this one who they come to find out was not honest about her academic background. And she had some problems because we had seen a few things that were like, we've got some problems here. So they took the right action and fired her, but things were in such a disarray. The person who headed that major company said to one of the people who ran one of his businesses, my name is on this school. You've got to fix this. And they said, they literally took someone from the board and put them in that school just to kind of get things stabilized. We appreciated the fact that that board came to us and told us what their plan was. You know, we always said it's better for you to talk to us when you know there's a problem as opposed for us to come to you. Because when we come to you, it means you don't know there's a problem, or you've known it and you haven't really addressed it. So they were very forthcoming, came to us, you know, we're going to put this woman and just let her stabilize the school until we get a principal, and then we will pull out. And then he said, and if it still doesn't work, then we will just walk away completely. What they didn't understand was walking away completely. I'm like, no board, no school. So you've got to figure out how that's going to work. Let's hope things get stabilized. And it did. I liked their approach in that one case. I think that's the only case where it could really work, because they were real clear. We don't do schools, but they knew business, and they came in and were very strategic about these things need to be stabilized and worked. They, did the necessary recruitment, checked the people's background thoroughly, because ask the right questions, go back to lesson 1, and got someone in place who were able to stabilize. They were able to step back into their board role without walking away completely, but that industry did take their name off the school. Just in case.
I think another example that I would like to bring is that I was in another organization that the board members, I think they did have the mission on their heart, but in the bylaws was nothing to talk about the terms. So they were there forever and ever and ever and ever, 25 years plus. But, in those 25 years, they were coming here and there and here and there. So you see them once, twice a year maybe, and they keep coming. But they are the ones that come and make the decisions, when the other board members were there month after month after month. So those board members that were coming after months will make certain decisions, and then suddenly in one of those months, the old board members come, and they want to change the whole thing. So it was a battle between board members. So it is very important that when you have your bylaws, you have your term then. So when it's time for them to leave, everybody leave. After, right now we have 2 3 years terms, so they can stay with us up to 6 years, for example. So after they leave, and they can come back after 3 more years. But you have to have that in your bylaws, because then you will have these other board members that they really don't know what you're doing, and then suddenly come and then make all these kind of crazy decisions, and you're like, why? What happened? All this work that you've been doing, then comes down because all these decisions that are making with board members that they never attend the board meetings. So that's something that we also have to keep in mind when you get into that position. Look in your bylaws, the terms. What is it that you're looking? They usually are different committees. In my organization, they were committees in the bylaws, but they were not committees working. They were committees on paper. So I'm like, no. We have to create these committees, because you have to help me to find this. You have to help me with the fundraising. You have to help me with all these things. That's the board. That's what you are here, to help me out, to support me. If I'm doing wrong, you just tell me, but I want you to support me, so let's move into those. So we create all these working committees, not only in paper. So now we're moving forward, like I mentioned, with the strategic planning, and the committees are part of that too. So now we are excited about it, because we see the light someplace out there, but we're working toward.
So I'll just add one quick story around it. You said something that made me say, let me share this, because it wasn't the best moment for me. So I'm sharing with everyone. Boards, have to understand, when boards realize that they are a team, they realize the importance of functioning like a team, right? Like your football team, basketball team, I like to use the professional team analogies. And so keeping in mind, we need a group of people that will be nice with each other is really important, because if you have a board member who everyone understands is someone who is always oppositional but never focuses on consensus, is that someone you need on your board member? I don't care how much money he can raise for you. Is that someone you need on your board? And so we had a board member who was not quite like that, but there was a consensus that she needed to go off the board. And this is about blurred lines. She would go to she would not go through the executive director. She would go to the program staff and ask questions and ask for information and blah, blah. That's not what board members do, right? If you have a question, you go to executive director, right? So she was, you know, just making a headache for everyone. And I was a board chair. What am I supposed to do, right? I'm supposed to deal with this. I think I might have been the vice president at the time, but I was like, oh my gosh. And then someone says to me, can you confront her? I'm like, oh. I don't know. So we had this meeting in which, you know, the request was made for her to leave the board. And it was really a very difficult, you know, it wasn't just me in the room, and actually someone else took the lead on it. And partially because of my inexperience, because I had not been in a situation before where I had to say to someone, you know, we really want you to go. So could I do it now? Sure, no problem. But you know, we go back to the PRETA principle, right? Are you equipped to take on the responsibility in which you're being asked to take on? Because there was a decision that she was a disruptive board member, and this would have ramifications for our ability to raise funds in the community, because she was also someone very active in the community as well. So this was very, very difficult. But when you get a board member like that, you have to deal with him, because you know, people talk very, very quickly, and it can have, you know, it can have some short-term as well as long-term implications for the reputation of your organization. You always have to protect, you know, one of your responsibilities as a board member is to protect the reputation of the organization.
Do you want to show them the metrics?
So show me the metrics. So this is, so my life is around program evaluation, performance measurement, so on and so forth. So one of my students started her own nonprofit, hugely successful, right? She's doing all this wonderful work around getting students, the average student, B and C students, financial aid to go to college full time. Wonderful program. And I'm hearing, you know, so you know how nonprofits have stories? Nonprofits don't have a shortage of stories, right? But when your organization is ready to grow, funders don't say, show me your stories, right? They say, show me your metrics. Show me your success. And so I say to her, how many students have you provided this training to? How many of them have received awards? What's the total amount of the awards? How many of them are still enrolled in school? How many of them are on the path to successful graduation? You know, just come, right? We're not asking for regressions or anything, right? We just want some basic data around student success. Because now when you go to a website for a nonprofit, in most places you can, if it's not on your homepage, there's a tab where you can see these metrics, right? And so she didn't have these metrics. I'm like, you have to pull this information together, because people will say to you, so how many students have gone through your program? You know, all of those questions that I just raised. She's like, I know. And so we finally get a grant application where they asked that information. So she had to tabulate it. And then when you tabulate it, it's like, wow. Right? It's just wonderful. It's amazing. But because you're so busy running, right? It's a very small organization. She didn't have anyone who can do that. But once you have that data, wow, right? It makes you competitive in terms of getting money from funders. It makes you more competitive in terms of, I believe all of this is a competition, right? There's a limited number of people who will donate to nonprofit organizations. So what makes you stand out? So it makes you more, when you have your metrics, it allows you to be competitive against all of the other nonprofits that are going to these organizations and say, see, I am better. You may hear about that organization more often, but I am better because look at my data. It makes you more competitive for hiring, right? Because the best talent wants to work for the best organizations. And it also makes you more competitive in terms of getting the best board members, right? In that the best board members want to be aligned with organizations that have a track record for success. So this notion of show me the measures goes to being able to create dashboards, scorecards, synopses of your financial information. You just have to have that information available quickly, and the leadership of the organization has to be able to speak it well also. And that also means your board members need to have key data that they can share quickly with people as well. So it's really, when we talk about nonprofit sustainability, nonprofit expansion, this notion of metrics is becoming even more important for long-term success.
And that, of course, is what the world of charter schools ideally should be built on, the metrics demonstrating performance. So when we first started with the 8 schools, 8 very diverse schools. Let's see, we had a school that dealt with adjudicated youth. We had a school that served adult immigrant students. We had a school that served pre-K and elementary students in the arts. So very diverse. And so not all, when you look at those 3, they're not gonna all be tested the same way. So we're like, how do you measure? Well, we allowed each school to have its own individual accountability plan because there wasn't any really one thing. For some of the middle and elementary schools, we could use then the SAT-9 test. But each school had its own accountability measure, and we said, isn't it beautiful, you know, mission specific, and we can have each school tell its story. Well, you know, we grow from 8 schools to, 16 schools, 20-something schools. We have to present before the city council, show me the metrics. Well, at this school, we could have some numbers, and admittedly, not all the numbers always looked real sexy in the beginning in terms of charter school performance when you just look at the Stanford 9, the same test that the district took, the state assessment, DC state assessment. But we always spoke about, it's not just about that test, it's so much more. But the so much more was so much more. We didn't have a good story anymore, in terms of a sector. And we knew that for the good of the movement, and let me clarify, because some people have different mindsets about charter schools and growth. None of us ever had the idea, although it's grown exponentially, that we want to replace the district. We always had the mindset of it's quality over quantity. We turned down more than we approved, but DC's law was so liberal and the funding was so great that it attracted a lot of people, so that contributed to the rapid growth. And we had to be able to keep up with that rapid growth and tell a compelling story. So that's when we developed that performance framework. We're able to appeal to, major grant entities.
I'm laughing because when they implemented the performance accountability framework, I think I was chair.
Okay.
I was chair at the charter school when they introduced this framework, and we looked at the framework and we were like, what are they doing? What are they? And I couldn't call Tamara, right? I didn't call her and say, ask all these questions. I couldn't call her, right? It was for us to figure out as a school. The school leader could call the public charter school board for clarification, but I couldn't call Tamara and say, I don't get this, why are you making us do that? We had to do it, that kind of stuff. And it forced us to go back to the accountability plan that we had and do some work around that. And so it was a big, there's always disagreement about what are the best measures or what is the best way that you're going to measure your success. And so one of the things in this particular environment, the education environment, is that oftentimes those metrics are given to you, right? What's passed, what's failed, what's high performing, low performing, you don't get to set that. Someone else sets that for you, and you have to figure out your path there. So I was just reflecting on that moment when I heard this measurement system was coming along. It created a lot of consternation.
Yeah, it's a nice way of saying consternation. For other people, they had other choice words.
I think locally, United Way is asking for that, but you have the chance also to provide a beautiful story. United Way, you have to provide a 6-month report and 1-year report. So when you provide the 6-month report, that's when you have the chance to provide your beautiful story. You tell them your story of what happened. And then at the year-end report, that's where you have to provide your metrics, your numbers, your percentage, and all that stuff. So we have to do that if we want to participate in United Way. And it's a competition, like you said, so you have to do the best that you can in order to provide those numbers. Something that I want to say about the ED, the executive director of the organization, is that if one day you decide to be one of the executive directors, you have to know that you're going to be in a lonely position. I'm serious. You have to have your circle of friends or your Sigma Delta or somebody there that you can talk to, because you are lonely. You cannot talk to your staff about other staff situation. You cannot talk to your staff about a board situation, and vice versa. So you are lonely in your office working and doing and thinking, you know, and then you see past the staff and then you're like, okay, hi, good morning. But then in your head, you're like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So you have to have a support group. You have to have a support group that will be able to listen to you and then help you out through that, whatever it is. Because otherwise, you're gonna be like pulling your hair everywhere. Because it's a lonely position when you are there. Is, you know, everybody see you like you're on the top. You don't see yourself like that, but everybody see you're on the top. So they really don't want to talk to you and tell you about those things. But then you figure it out that something is not going on here. So.
And I would add, it is important to have those networks, because, you know, any problem that you're facing as an executive director or board chair is not a new problem. Someone's already been there, right? So it doesn't make, it's not very beneficial for you to try and figure it out in the vacuum of information. Someone else has already been through something similar. They've learned lessons, learn from those lessons, learn from those lessons. Don't ignore what you hear other people. That's not us, we're different. No, you're not that different really. You know, how you might articulate it in terms of the people involved might be different, but really a lot of this, these are common, things we talk about are common. They're common problems.
The not-for-profit. The not-for-profit is like a life cycle, like our life. You know, that's what I was referring. It's like a startup, and then they're in the middle age, teenagers, they're in the middle age, they're growing, and they're doing more awesome here. And sometimes they are in decline, and that's when you get sick and something happens, and then you die. Or you are there in decline. The not-for-profit could not die, and maybe somebody else come into the rescue mission, and then you rescue, and then it start all over again. You know, the curve start like just born and start growing. Let's walk, then run, and then, you know, get into the mature age when maybe there is an opportunity for another executive director to come and move it forward. You know.
That concludes what we have to share. We hope that you found the lessons we've shared useful. I know we gave you all cards where you could write questions. Norma's coming down with a question or two. So, take off the glasses so I can see better. I can give this to anyone. So this question isn't, well, maybe this is a Margo, because this was related to you. You spoke about asking the right questions. As a graduate student interested in nonprofit management field, what's your one best piece of advice if I have an organization in mind that I'd like to work for right out of college?
One question?
The one best piece of advice that you would give.
If you are interested in working in the nonprofit sector as a career, the one piece of advice I would give is to remember that a nonprofit is a business. Okay, we tend to think about nonprofits as these, oh, everyone's so nice. No one, it feels good. You know, the children need help. Yes, the children need help. But this community needs someone who is able to tackle with these challenges, right? In order to be successful, a nonprofit needs to be profitable, okay? It has to have well-managed finances. It has to have excellent staff. It has to have clear programs. So on the for-profit side, we think about Apple always, you know, and Google creating, you know, new stuff. The same mentality has to be brought to a nonprofit. The community's needs change. If you're doing a program that you did in 2005 and 2015, that program probably is not as effective as it was in 2005. So if you think about a nonprofit as a business, as Fanny was saying, the life cycle, things have to change. And just like in a for-profit where you're looking ahead to what's coming down the pipeline, the same thing has to happen in a nonprofit. You're running a business and people are dependent upon your business being successful. So you want to keep that, I think, in up front.
And one of the things that came to my mind as you were talking about it being a business and that it has programs, you know, there's the programs that are talked about and there'll be nice pictures on the website and nice words about it. But to know if there's really anything behind it is looking at that budget. If you can get an opportunity to see the budget, how much money is really being dedicated to certain programs to give you a clue about, is it, you know, how's it funded and how's it happening, as well as a strategic plan to see where they're going.
So we have the question, can each of you describe the top 1 to 2 skills you use on a regular basis in your current roles? Which is the most important?
Wow. My current role, I didn't get a chance, it was included in the introduction. I formerly was Deputy Director of the DC Public Charter School Board. I'm currently an education consultant, working mostly with charter school authorizers. Some of who are nonprofits. Well, right, because the world of authorizing varies from place to place. In some places, they are nonprofit organizations that are given a chance to authorize. I'm trying to think of a specific.
What is it? Can you repeat it again?
Can you describe the top 1 to 2 skills you use on a regular basis in your current roles? Which is the most important?
For me, right now, it's coaching. I'm coaching everybody, including myself. I'm coaching and I'm talking and I'm very good at listening, so I have to listen, and listen, because I said that we have to trust between the staff and everybody, so I have to be very open and very open to sometimes listen and maybe things that I don't want to listen. But I have to listen and I have to be very open and I have to coach the staff that I'm working with. You know, I call them, everybody talks about in a yearly, what is it? Yearly personal plan, but then the performance, yearly performance, right? But I do not like the yearly performance. I like the monthly meetings and informal performance. Why? Because I don't want to wait until 1 year and tell them, oh, by the way, you didn't do this and this and this wrong. It's not fair for the person. So that's part of the coaching. I meet with a person on a monthly basis. With every single staff I meet, either Dunkin' Donuts in North Carolina, I can tell you exactly what the places that I go for different ones. So we meet there informally, and we talk about, we discuss about it, and then the coaching part comes after we talk about it. So for me are those two, listening and coaching.
The one that comes to mind that you just mentioned, the listening piece, because in my role now as a consultant, in the evaluation work that I do, visiting different authorizers, everyone is set up differently. This past year, I'm thinking of 2 authorizers I visited. One was a state Department of Education that was an authorizer. Another one was a small nonprofit. And so no 2 are alike, you know, and both of those are very different from what I came up with. So, you know, I review the documents, but I'm really having to have that open mind and listen to what people are saying, as well as read between the lines sometimes to ask the right questions, because that whole process is about evoking information. A lot of times people, you talked about before, having documents set up in a way that, and a lot of times people don't. So I'm going in an evaluation, you know, they give me 5 pieces of documents and I'm supposed to come up with a whole report based on that. So it's listening and asking the right questions, because typically there's more there than what's being presented to you. So knowing how to ask good questions.
Yeah, I think, I'm really focused on data, reporting, and communication. We get large chunks of information all the time, right? Whether it's numbers or feedback or something. And so what we try to do is help people figure out, how do you want to talk about what you're finding? So it's like data visualization. So we're trying to really think about what's the best way to visually, whether it's graphic or some other infographic kind of thing, really trying to think about what are the best ways to visually communicate large chunks of information so that people get it right away, right? So that they don't have to sort through stuff and you don't have to say a lot of stuff so for people to see it. So we work with, so the groups that we work with, we're really trying to help them understand the different ways, like trying to not always use PowerPoint and smart art, or use your smart art differently to get information across, because we know that the data visualization is growing more, is important, and there are a lot more tools available for us to do that as well. So to help people sort that out is what we spend a lot of time on right now.
I was trying to think of some more. If something else comes up, because I was trying to get back to my role as an authorizer and me working with boards, but we have more questions. So, how do you respond when faced with critics of charter schools? I said, this is for me. Yes. For example, when trying to raise funds or get necessary facilities. I might need to ask this person to expand a little bit on this question, because I've never been in a position. Who asked the question? Maybe, yeah. Okay, because as an authorizer, I've never been in a position where I have to get the facility, or have been, we tried to make sure we weren't advocates of getting more. We wanted to make sure schools are properly funded, but thankfully the DC law makes it so that they do get properly funded and get money for facilities. So, there's the philosophical conversation to have with people about the idea of charter schools, but when it comes to, they think that they are taking facilities, I know that's an issue in some place, or taking funding. So what's your specific? Okay, but so for example, I know some people, you said to raise funds.
Well, I was just trying to give a concrete example where you might kind of come into contact with.
Well, I know some people's challenge, and I say that it's really available to anyone. Most charter schools, if they're going to do well, if they're going to do really well, they've got to raise money. That the per pupil funding isn't enough to get the additional staff that they have. They typically have additional staffing. They require them to work longer hours. They've got Saturday school. Some have school all year round. And some people are very critical of them. Well, look how they do all of that. They're raising all that money. And I say, well, let the traditional school system do the same thing, so that they can be able to raise funds. The critique that I typically hear is that they are taking money away from the traditional schools. And I say that's not true, because the money follows the child, Yeah,
so when we found our new school home, right, it was in a community. The community was not pleased to hear that a charter school might be moving into their community. It's just like if you heard a group home was moving to your community, right? You're thinking, oh, these wild children are going to come to our neighborhood and take away, the teachers are going to take away the parking. This is going to change the quality of life in our neighborhood, that kind of stuff. And so what we did was have, one, you have to clear up the inaccuracies, right? In terms of who the children are, where they're coming from, the age group, that kind of stuff. Two, we had community meetings where members of the community could come and share their concerns and answer any questions or ask questions that they needed more information on. And then once the school opened, have an opportunity for the community members to participate in the school, right? So that they can see how the school not only would be a benefit to the children, but also how the school could be a benefit to the community, right? So that also created a response within the school of how do we make sure that our kids are respecting the communities in which they're traveling? How do we hold them accountable if they don't do those things? How do we also demonstrate respect to our communities by keeping the buildings clean and things like that? So that type of resistance requires an acknowledgement that people, whether it's a school or some other nonprofit entity that people may not think is going to be great, is developing a really good communication plan so that they know what changes will happen, what accommodations you're able to make right away, and which ones might take a little bit. Because we ended up working with the Department of Transportation to get the streets repaired and kind of stuff.
You all created community space, like a community garden. So, you know, you try to make the buildings open to the community. And in your case, it wasn't a former school. Correct. It was a former monastery. So, you know, each city has its own challenges. We, right, I won't even get into the DC politics of facilities. There wasn't a whole lot. There was a little bit of co-location, and the schools that charter schools did take over were schools that the city would either lease or in some cases sold. I think they started selling them, then they realized once you sell it, we can't get it back. So then they said, okay, we'll lease the facilities. So we feel like we're arguing you need to release more of those buildings for us to use because the population of kids overall in DC had gone down, and in particular within DCPS, the population of kids attending traditional schools was declining while charter schools was increasing. So we wanted more facilities. So always been. I don't know if that answered your...
In I guess, operational experience, yes, very much.
Okay.
I was also kind of interested in the philosophical level.
The philosophical piece. These kids are, I see it as these are our kids. I don't see it as charter school kids and traditional school kids. They are our kids. We want to make sure that they're all provided for, whether it's in, and the thing is, I'm very passionate about, you know, I don't want just for charter schools. We want good things for the kids within the traditional school system. They need good buildings, clean, with access to computers. So it shouldn't be an either or. You know, it should be a both and to provide for our kids. That's where I come from. You know, some other people still see, you know, the argument I most often hear is that you're taking away from the traditional schools. And one thing that I kind of share back, there isn't that flexibility within the traditional school system because of labor laws and things. You know, a charter school can grow or shrink as needed based on the enrollment. You know, when I look at traditional school systems, if their enrollment is declining, they don't necessarily then say, okay, we're going to lessen the size of our central office. You know, it did happen. We talked about Michelle Rhee. She came in with her broom and did a little bit of that and was quite an upheaval. But it's, you know, ideally that's how it would happen, but unfortunately it's not as simple as that. So it is going to look like we're taking away from them because they haven't shrunk their size to fit the population of students that they are serving.
So this one says, what is the best balance between inclusion of untested board members who might have idealism, passion, vision, with established members of industry?
So I think it depends. It depends upon what are the organization's needs. So if you are in a crisis situation, you will tend to having more board members who are experienced, right? I think. And if you are in a stable environment, you can have maybe if you wanted to put numbers on it, 50-50. Because you have that space for your new board members to grow and learn into their responsibilities. Even if you bring on board members who are experienced and they're new to your organization, they still need an onboarding process. They still need to understand what's unique about your particular nonprofit so that they can understand how their previous board experience fits or does not fit with the organization in which they're currently going to be a board member. One of the things that new board members often, if you've never been in a nonprofit board before, is that it's not always clear to people when they join boards that they are taking on a legal responsibility. they don't always see that, yeah, you know, if this nonprofit fails, or if someone decides to sue this nonprofit, you are on the hook for this.
Well,
You, the board.
Right now also in Syracuse, we are blessed by actually Maxwell. They partner with Central New York Community Foundation, and they do a lot of board training. So new board members, for example, could come to those board trainings, so they have the idea actually how it will work, what is the legal capacity, what is the governance, what is the board needs to do, why do you want to be on a board? And so I think that will open it up. Another thing that we were doing in our board is that if somebody has no experience, we tend to match with somebody that already have the experience, so the companion, and so they can talk about it out of the board meeting, so they can kind of bring it to speed. So it will be great for that, for both, because both learn at the same time. You know, one to learn about the board expectations, and the other one learns about the person actually. Why I wanted to be a board member? What part of the mission do they like, or the programs? You know, it's very interesting.
I'll add just one quick piece to that. So this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about targeted recruitment. So if you bring on a new board member who doesn't have any nonprofit experience at all, but they know exactly the expectation, where they've been asked to contribute, it contributes to the learning curve a lot faster, because they already know where they're going to be asked to step up. So they know where their experience is going to be needed. If you come to a board meeting as a brand new board member and you don't know what you're going to do, that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign.
I have another one that says, given strategic plans tends to be 3 to 5 years, and the board positions might be 3-year terms, what recommendations are there for a not-for-profit strategic plans? Actually, the strategic plans that we're going through right now is going to be 1 to 2 years only. It used to be 3 to 5 years before. They were long strategic plannings, but everything is changing rapidly. So we cannot have a 5-year strategic planning now. In the not-for-profit world, everything is changing by the day, everything. And so our strategic planning is going to be 2 years only. And I'm thinking that the other not-for-profit organizations have a strategic planning. And actually now the strategic planning, they come out with, what's the new name? Strategic planning, business plan. So that's the business plan. So you were talking about early, look at this as a business. And so that's what we're doing too. You know, the strategic planning will be a business plan, very detailed, and who's going to do this, by when, what, by when, who. So this is what we're doing now.
Okay, what are the top 2 to 3 things that successful charter schools do, and the top 3 ones, I guess, for the ones that fail, what do they experience? The top 3 things I would say is fundraising, being able to raise funds outside of the per pupil payment that's received. The other one is leadership, both at the board and at the school level. And I'll expand on that piece in a little bit. And the third one is the model, you know, just having a clear model and being true to it. And I'll expand on that. With the leadership that I see now, and it varies from place to place, I'd like to say that I think in certain places, the charter school movement has matured enough where you don't have to get someone who's starting from scratch. You know, their only experience has been working in a traditional school. When we first got started, that's all there was. But now, you know, you've got people who I say been hypnotized, if people are familiar with KIP, you know, they go through their training and, you know, they know what the model is and they do it. And some of them stay with KIP, some leave. But you've got some people who've come from strong programs who understand what it is to run a successful charter school. And my thinking is that when I've seen people who want to establish a charter school, look for someone with that demonstrated track record of being able to run a school and do it successfully. Everyone talks about the population of kids you want to serve. They come, you know, they don't have the education that they should have. They're not at grade level. You know, so you want someone who's demonstrated they can move students up. And if they can't do that, then, you know, I say you're replicating what already exists, and that's not what we're in business for. So having that strong academic leader who can move kids forward, demonstrate it. So in DC, there's plenty of those people around. You know, I've gone to other places. I was just in Minnesota, maybe not so much, you know. But still, someone has probably demonstrated success within a traditional school that you can have them be able to do that within a charter school. In terms of the models in terms of staffing, not just how you're going to serve kids, you know, whatever kind of instructional approach you're going to use, but the staffing models have become so sophisticated, and people have put a lot of thought. They really want kids' time on task. These kids are thinking all day long. They don't let a minute come past, you know, spending some time during lunch, having them working on some of their skills. And in doing that, you know, well, who's going to be there doing it? Because teachers need time to plan. You know, they need some time for lunch. So people are thinking, you know, teachers don't do lunch duty anymore. You know, they're doing their common planning and some professional development during the day. So they're bringing in other people, graduate students, volunteers, who are kind of filling in those gaps for making sure kids have more time, and, you know, and you have the extended school day typically, extended school year. So you're bringing in other folks. So you have a very interesting staffing model that really addresses the needs of the students, both academically as well as emotionally, mentally. You know, it used to be that your guidance counselors might start at, you know, middle school and up. Now I hear people having counselors with elementary kids, definitely bringing in social workers, because they're looking at that whole school, child. Some of them do wraparound services. I think if you can do that, that's a bonus. But at a minimum, make sure you have the right people there who can serve that child's, you know, full needs. And like I said, the funding. That's where a good board comes in. And the thing is, if you have a good model and you have success, you can then, you know, it's the show me the metrics piece. You'll have the performance to be able to attract more money. But, you know, at the same time, well, I think KIPP was good first, and then when they came to DC and were good, then you attract people like, you know, the head of the Washington Post, who can sit on your board, you know. Very easy for him to bring in lots of money, and now they have 10 campuses across the city, so.
Yeah, I think on the challenge side, and it's been a while now since I've been directly affiliated with a charter school, so you'll let me know if this is wrong. I think the board stuff is still a challenge for many charter schools.
Got their friends, you know.
Yeah.
Some of them, you know, they don't think strategically about the board.
Right. You know, it's your friends, not your families. It's your friends that are on the boards, or people who are experienced in education, but they don't have the experience from a board, right? Boards are about governance, strategic thinking, looking ahead. And so I hope I'm not offending anyone. It's just giving an example. So that the person was an excellent special education teacher, but does that necessarily translate to you understanding the impact of special education policy and what it means for decision making in your particular charter school? And I also did reviews of charter schools. And one of the things, when you said the models, one of the things that I always found interesting to look at was the so schools create, you know, you have the arts school, right? We're going to use an arts-based education to ensure that our kids graduate on time. I was always interested in the connection between this is your educational philosophy, and then how does that translate to the curricula, right? That's what we were asked to look at. You have a philosophy by which you expect students to learn, but does that translate into what happens every day in the classroom? And that's still a challenge, right? You can have the Margo Bailey School of Justice, but what does that mean for how you teach science in your classroom? What does that mean for how you teach, you know, governance in your English class? So it was making that transition between your educational philosophy to what did it look like day to day in the classroom.
The integration,
yeah.
You know, so it's not just, you know, kids are really great artists. And then we go to math. But there's definitely, I've seen some where they are able to show the integration well, you know, some not so much. And another piece with that board piece that can be a failure, just thinking about, you know, having the right people, because often we see people in the whole group that comes together, nothing but educators. Don't know business, there's nobody that knows law. So, you know, that can be a problem. I'm trying to think of a third piece. I've seen some succeed even with, you know, just on the, not hiring well. I mean, what we said before, just the not hiring well. You know, the example that I gave of, you know, the school could have failed because they had an MPA as the principal. She wasn't meant for that. She didn't get the development. So, you know, and it gets back to what I said, what makes you successful is hiring well, and when you don't,
yeah, I think one of the tough things with education is we all have been educated, right? So in many ways, you know, I know I say this all the time. What's so hard about teaching, right? What's so hard about getting kids to learn? Well, it is hard to do this, right? And so when schools, these are very difficult issues that schools are challenged with in creating, you know, the future citizens. And it's really, really difficult, particularly in the school systems in which many charter schools are flourishing. There are many, many challenges, and it's easy to make quick judgments about what we think will be successful or why something isn't successful, and it's not easy at all. You really do have to, you know, I relied on those who are trained in this area to help guide us through this, because these are really, really difficult questions, but it's easy to judge. It's really quick to get opinions on this.
So 2 pieces on that that's still a continuation of the board piece. And I said, yeah, you have a board full of educators, so those schools fail financially. Yeah, just, you know, the money's not done well. And just an anecdote that I had gotten, or a line that I had gotten from one of our reviewers of applications, because for us it's all, we take all comers in terms of who can apply. There's no screening. And so you get some very interesting people, and this one woman's assessment of it at the end of a day of actually interviewing these folks is, you know, and for some people they won't get the line about Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, you know, it's like, let's have a show, you know, and it said by the end of the movie, you know, they've got their outfits and it's all about a show, and that's what these people think, you know, let me get my friends together and they'll give us a building and money and the kids will come and they'll learn, you know, but they don't have any of the needed critical pieces, you know. I'll just stand up and teach and, you know, read from a book, and the kids, and it's not that. You know, those are the people that don't get approved. So,
so we have a question on metrics. Metrics are important. In your experience, given the controversy around value-added metrics, how do you balance between getting enough data and listening to the community? For example, not over-testing students. And so I've been looking at this for a while. You guys are just hearing it for the first time. I think one of the, no, there's plenty of data. There's plenty of data available, right? The question is, how do you, but oftentimes there are data gaps. There's data that is missing that you need to figure out how to fill. So that's one issue. Another issue is, how do you have a balanced set of metrics that tell the whole story? A couple of times we've talked about telling your story. And so so you can have, using the charter schools as an example, you can have your metrics around student performance. You have your metrics around student culture, right, or school culture. And then you can have a set of metrics around your finances and so on and so forth. So I think when you look at your organization, you should be thinking about a balanced set of metrics, right? And then it's identifying that core set of metrics that you're going to track on a regular basis. So that might be your dashboard or your scorecard, whatever you want to call it, or which approach you want to use. So you can have, 100 metrics that you're tracking on a regular basis, but we can't consume 100 metrics at one time. So you figure out what is the core set of metrics that we want to include. And if community perception, if parent perception of over-testing is something that you want, that's important to you, you will track that and build that into your decision-making process. So the board and the organizational leadership will identify what is the most important stuff that we want to look at on a regular basis to say, how well are we doing? And then that allows you to have this nice representation of things that everyone agrees is important, and those areas where people think are, where there's a disagreement over what's important, and then as you track that data over time, you can see whether or not it rises or falls in terms of your, whether or not you continue to monitor it. And when you do that, that's when you get back to the data gaps. So what are the gaps? What is the information that you need to get, and you figure out what are the best ways to get it, and then you build that into your set of metrics.
I know for us as an authorizer, we, in terms of testing, just used or required schools to use the state assessment. So that was good for grades 3 through 8 and grade 10. And from that, we looked at the percentage of students who are proficient and looked at a growth value added measure. But then some schools, underneath that, you don't want to wait until April or March to take the test and say, let's hope they got it. And then only to find out in the summer that they didn't, and where did we go wrong? So that's where I think there can be the issue of over-testing. Each school makes its own decision about what can we use as benchmarks or leading indicators to kind of tell us where we think our kids might be. And I know as an authorizer, we would often have some concerns because, people like, and then, in September, they're gonna take these 3 tests, and then by November, they're gonna take these 5, and we're like, okay. But each school would have to make their own decisions, so they have the autonomy. So it gets back to what Margo was saying. As a board, and also parents have to. Some parents might really like, my kid, because I want to know my child is on target. So the flexibility or the choice, hopefully, is there within communities that someone can find a school that they think matches their child and, doesn't overtest. But boards do have to think critically about that.
One thing to add in the metrics conversation, particularly for nonprofits, is you have made lots of promises already to your funder, right? When you fill out those grant applications, you are signing up for a set of metrics that you're signing up. I'm going to report back on A, B, C, D. So that's the initial set of data you have to get a handle on. So you're going to report on it anyway because you said you were going to do it. Now, when you do your grant report, you're going to have to report on it. And so when you look across all of your grants, are you asking, did you say you were going to report out on the same types of information? Or did you, in grant A, you said you were going to do this. Grant B, you said you were going to do this. Grant C, you said you were going to do that. And you put it all together so you can then figure out, okay, these are all the promises we made in terms of the data that we are going to collect. How are we going to make this happen? And then how does that drive other decisions about a scorecard and a dashboard? Because you want to get a handle on all of these promises you've made about data sharing, and then hopefully it aligns to what you put in your strategic plan so it fits together nicely.
I have another question. How do you deal with a not-for-profit board that will not participate in board development and or training and think that fundraising is only the ED's responsibility? They just show up, and another part of that, they were still reluctant after a founder severely criticized them and asked for a corrective action plan.
This doesn't sound like a made-up question. Taken from real life.
Yeah.
When you are in that position as an ED and you are talking with your board for the first time, you have to talk about those issues, the board, the government's part, and the fundraising part. Either you get it or you give it. So if you give it, great, but if you cannot give it, then you go and find somebody that will get it. And so it's just, you have to be upfront. When you're looking for your next board members, I'm sure that they love the mission, but you also have to be upfront and tell them, by the way, you're going to have to help us in the fundraising. And after you've been talking and talking and talking, you can pretty much say, you know what, it's like a job. We ask you, and that's when Tamara was talking earlier about it. It's a confrontation. Yes, it is, because you are telling that person that they're not doing what they're signed up for it. And so, unfortunately, you're going to have to let that board member go because they
I think this person was the ED. That's the sense that I got.
ED, board chair, I think the real question is, how do we get rid of them, right? So you're already in you may already be, you may already be in this situation and you recognize that you have a group of board members who are not helpful and it's time for them to go. So what do you do to move them off? And so hopefully the executive director has a board chair that agrees, or the board chair has an executive director that agrees, because this is about a strategy takeover, okay? This is going to be a very strategic process for thinking through what's in your bylaws for removing board members, all right? Do you have, Carol's over here. You have to think through, do you have enough support from some board members, are there board members who think like you do, right? You're going to need some votes, okay, to move people off your board. What are your bylaws? What do your state laws allow you to do? So that you can really start thinking through, what do I have available within our hands that we can take charge of this? The other side of it is you have to have a set of board members who are ready to step right, new board members who are ready to step right in, right? Because you don't want to get people off and now you're like, because everybody's going to know you got rid of your board members, right? Right? So you already have to let new board, we have a question here about how to recruit board members. So in that everybody knows your business, okay? Don't think that people don't know if your board is ineffective or effective. And so when a couple of board members are forced off the board and you're bringing on new board members, you have to let the new board members know what's coming down the pipeline so they don't get caught in surprise by this. So this is a strategy, right? Because this is a very planned process about giving people an opportunity to land softly someplace else where they can continue. Maybe you create an advisory committee or something.
So in Syracuse, that was this small organization that, remember I was talking earlier about the board members being 20 and 30 years? Okay, so this small organization been in trouble, up and down, up and down. And so was a foundation, actually, Gifford Foundation, the one that strategized around that. And so what they did is they came with funding to the organization and said, we wanted to help you and we want to restructure. What would they did? Put new board members, people that they knew how to help, and take the 20 and the 30 and the 45-year-olds that been there out and restructure the bylaws. So that was the strategy that they utilized. They came in, clean house, move on to the next one per se. So that's what they did. I got to tell you that my experience in working at a small not-for-profit, you have to, as an executive director, you have to make your connections with somebody that you think that they are going to be able to help you. For example, Syracuse University. When I started in this tiny not-for-profit, it was probably $200,000 budget. And I connect immediately with Syracuse University, with everybody. Maxwell, School of Social Work, IT, everybody. We were 5 employees, like 30 students, and groups come in and do a project. By the time that I left the organization, it was $3 million organization and 50 employees. So you have to look who can help you, who can work along with you. And I'm very thankful to the university, for SU, because they, at that time, they will say, okay, so what is it that you need? How can I help? And I said this, and that. And they will be able to, every 6 months, a rotation, a group of students. Every semester, I did have students, Maxwell was the one that was doing One, the fundraising. The other one was evaluation. You know, what are you doing good? What are you doing bad? How can we change it? And then the needs of the community. What are the needs? Because you mentioned whatever happened 10 years ago, that might not be the need of the community today. So the students were looking, what are the needs? Focus group, focus group, focus group. Let's bring the community, let's bring the community. And that's how we generate, because we start looking in our mission, but the community that need, what are the services that community need? So
that dovetails with the two questions I have here. One is, what has been your best resource for recruiting volunteers? And so using the university environment is a great way, of course, is an excellent way to recruit volunteers. I would add to that, you have to be clear about what are you exactly looking for, right? So, because your volunteers could also be people who are paid staff, right? So it's being clear about what are the needs that your organization is seeking to fill, and then asking the question is, how much time are you asking? If this is a volunteer position, what does it require, so on and so forth, because it goes back to what are the needs that, what are you hoping to achieve by having someone do this job, whether it's paid or non-paid. So you just kind of do a drop list, that long list of, this is what I need, where can I help? And one of the things we know about volunteers now is that you can have people who volunteer in your organization for years and years, but then there are volunteers who just want to do that one thing. They just want to contribute that one thing, whether it's helping you do a table, at a fair, or they want to come in and redo your website. There's lots of different ways that people want to volunteer for organizations, and you just want to make it as easy as possible. And then as your volunteer base grows, you probably need a volunteer coordinator to manage all of that.
I know from some schools, there used to be an entity in DC that could kind of help schools do a number of things, a resource center, one of those being, get new board members. And when that entity went away, we saw there was a big gap. So our office had started working with someone else to say, let's begin to do some of this. And I know places they tried to tap were alumni organizations, professional organizations, National Society of whatever, because there was one for funders, because everybody wants funders. So organizations like that that could come in and.
Yeah, given your mission, there are going to be some natural affinity organizations that you could reach out to, who you can work with. The second question is, what is the best way to approach someone to ask them to be on your board, especially as a newly formed nonprofit?
I think for me, when I created radio 21 years ago, I did it for myself. It was a self-started thing. And I tell you why. When I came to America, I didn't speak the language. I didn't speak English, right? And so I was very disconnected with my own community. And I didn't know what's happening here. I didn't know who the mayor was, who the politicians were, nothing. So I said, how can I get involved, or how can I learn? And then I created a radio show. So I start talking on the radio about myself. I feel lonely. I don't know who the mayor is. And then I put Latin music. So, so that was the connection. So then I start learning English, right? And so then I said, now it's going to be bilingual, so I can talk. I go back and forth in English and in Spanish with Latin music. So now I talk about issues that are important to our community, and I want to be the bridge between the Latino and the community in general. So now that organization, when just started 20 years, nobody wants to be in something that, what is that? So I said, this is pretty important, and this is what happened to me. So I explained exactly what I said, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I can help you. So little by little, they start coming with experience, with no experience. What did I know about not-for-profit myself either? I didn't know. I just come up with the idea. Then I start learning as I go through that process. And then I start teaching them. This is what it is. This is what it is. So I become a teacher, a social worker, everything in one room. Today, the board members of the organization, it's all volunteer. Nobody gets paid for nothing, but everybody does everything. the fundraising, the contact, the table, everything. And we have people from big companies around the area that are sitting in that board, and they all are Latinos because they like to have the music, they like to have the connection, so we all have fun. It's a very fun board. We talk and we laugh and we go back and forth in Spanish, and everybody's welcome. And the only thing that I did is I told my story. So if you want to get board members, tell the story about your organization. Tell them, like I am recruiting board members, so I went and I told them, you know, how I saw it, how I see it, and where I see it going. And then they said, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. Yes, I would like to learn more about it. The next thing that you might want to do is invite that person to an event, one of your events. So that person can come to the event and see, oh, okay, so this is what you're talking about. Next thing, you want to invite them to come to your program so that person can see your programs, you know, hands-on. And then questions might come, or maybe she will say, for us, it's only woman, so that's what I always refer to, she. Maybe she will say, oh, yeah, I love your program. I want to be involved. How can I help? That's when the right ask comes, because you then tell them, well, we need fundraising, we need this, we need this, So that's how I recruit. In the meantime, I have a whole package that I go through, you know, the bylaws, and then the fundraising, the expectations, who is doing what, who is on the board, why it's important to do this job, and all these things that I talk about it. So it's like a selling case.
Yeah, I think if you're a newly formed organization, in today's environment, right, where we have these huge expectations around nonprofits, and I think this is different from 10, 15 years ago, is that when you approach someone to be a board member, even of a new organization, they're going to expect to see stuff about your organization. So as Fanny says, clarity about your mission is going to be very important. I'm not saying you have to have fancy pamphlets and things like that, but people will expect you to be very clear about what your mission is and how you expect to provide your services and how you see the organization growing over time. What I'll add, two quick things, is you don't have to say yes to everyone who wants to be a board member. Just because you're looking for new board members, you're new, blah, 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 you don't have to say yes just because I came to you and said, can I be a board member? You have the right to say no, right? It's a new organization. You and your board chair have the right to say no to someone. And along with that is you can let people, you know, for newly formed organizations, you can let people know, and we just want you to be a board member just for a year or two, you know, just till we get our feet ready. Because I know what you can do for our organization is provide us with important support and feedback that will make us grow. So now that person has an expectation of how long you would like for them to help you. And hopefully you're open to this, getting critical feedback that will help you grow. Because you don't want just the yes person there. You want someone who, particularly in your early years, in all, you know, I said early years of development, but in, you know, the whole time, but particularly in your early years of development, you need people who are going to be honest with you about your skills as the executive director, or your skills as the board chair forming this, so that they can help you grow, because it's an important learning time.
And speaking of time, it's 12 o'clock. Thank you for your questions. They were very good, very thought-provoking, and I hope you got something from this that you can take away and use as you venture into the nonprofit world.
Yeah.